Hello, Trinity family. This is Pastor Doer, and this is your Theology in 3. Today, I would like to talk about John, the Gospel of John, his introduction to Jesus, his incarnation account. This is how John presents the birth of Jesus, which is very unique. You'll see when we read it. So read John 1 through 5, and verse 14. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And we have seen his glory, glory as of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. It's very weird, right? Like you're used to seeing angels and shepherds and wise men and angry King Herod and all the rest. And this story doesn't present Jesus in a way that you typically see in your nativity scene. That's okay. It's a good thing we have a different perspective. John's presentation is a little bit different. He's first connecting us back to Genesis 1 with in the beginning, and he's also using this identification of Jesus as the Word. This is very interesting that he does this. He's pointing out that Jesus is the revelation of God to its people. And so when you see in John 1 where he says the Word, he's talking about Jesus. That's what he's doing. Now, there's a very particular word in verse 14 I'd like to highlight today. That is the word dwelt. That's how we translate it into English, or sometimes if it's the NIV, made his dwelling. And this is, in Greek, the word skeno. And skeno is the word that means tabernacle. And so it might be a better translation to say, and the Word became flesh and tabernacled among us. Now, the tabernacle was the Old Testament tent, the worship space of the people of Israel, where God lived with his people in the wilderness as they wandered around, and he protected them as they wandered around. And so John is drawing our attention back to this wandering in the wilderness to say God doesn't live in a tent. He doesn't live in a temple. Instead, he lives in Jesus. Jesus is God. That's who God is. This is very interesting because what it does is it says God isn't some cosmological being far out there that we just like, oh yeah, I believe in God. Modern movies will say, the universe wants this for me. It's not that kind of nonsense. Instead, what we're looking at here is we're looking at a God that we can point to, that we could touch, that we can read the stories of, and we can repeat them. This is the guy who lived and walked. He lived in first century Israel. He healed people. He died on the cross. He rose from the dead. We can point to that guy and say, that guy's my God. That's who my God is. Now, this is also interesting because when Jesus enters into the human realm, when Yahweh God enters into the human realm by being incarnated in human flesh, what it does is he enters human history. Because he enters human history, it allows us to study God by studying human history, which means that the Bible has a lot of history in it. It's written to be taken historically. There are things in there that we read and we're like, this is a story that has actually happened. And these are people. They're real people doing real things in a real place in a real time. And so as a student of Scripture, it's our responsibility to try to unpack that. And we can do that by reading books. We can do that by looking at artifacts. We can do that by going to the land of Israel. This is very interesting and unique because what it does is it allows us to study God by studying human history. What we can do is we can read the biblical story. The biblical story presents itself as history. And so we read it and we see real people doing real things in a real place in a real time. We can look at artifacts like in archaeology, and we can look at those things and say, this is how people lived. We can go to the land of Israel and we can walk where Jesus was. We can see the things Jesus saw. We can even sit in some of the places that Jesus sat because we know that God entered into the human realm. And as God enters into the human realm, he makes it so that we can interact with him in the human realm. And so he's subject to history. And we can read about God's interactions and how that applies to you and to me and our lives today. I pray that you have a blessed rest of your day.